Hey guys, this is lesson two, the first part of it. And so in this lesson, we are eventually going to get to solving the trig equations, but this is going to be very much like a bridge lesson. So I think you'll kind of feel it as we go along. Um, we'll just kind of work our way through this. So um, if we've been talking in lesson one about like the quadrants that sine inverse is in. And so that's going to be 1 and 4. And remember, 1 is positive, 4 is negative. So that should be familiar to you. I do not know why these little division signs are here. No idea. So we have sine inverse of square root of 3 over 2. So the first thing that's jumping out at me is that it's positive. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my unit circle or like kind of figure out it with my hand trick. But square root of 3 over 2, the y value in quadrant 1, that is going to be at 60 degrees. So something I want to say is up here, we are going to really focus now on degrees, but then we're going to focus on just the radians. Something else that we're going to hit is when we get out of quadrant 1, we're really going to focus on reference angles. So I want to kind of take the time to review, but this is kind of where we're starting off. So I wanted to kind of give you a heads up there. So first of all, don't forget the all students take calc thing that we talked about. So in this quadrant, both your x and y are positive. Over here, so if I were to like plot a point right here, that'd be a negative x and a positive y. Down here, everything is negative, and over here you have a positive x and a negative y. So that'll kind of come into play as we're going through this. And then the next thing I want to do is talk about reference angles. So if you have, if you're given a reference angle, so we know, we're going to know the reference angle, and now we have to find the angle, the actual angle. So take that in consideration. I'm not finding the reference angles. So in this, in quadrant 1, don't forget that the reference angle, if you have that, you actually have the angle. In quadrant 2, if we have the reference angle, so let's say in this quadrant it's like 150. So, or I'm sorry, that's the actual angle. So let's say our reference angle is 30 degrees. So we would take 180 minus whatever angle that is to get the 150. In quadrant 3, let's pretend that we still have 30 degrees for our reference angle. So our actual angle in quadrant 3 would be 210. So what I'm doing is I'm taking 180 plus the angle. And then in quadrant 4, if I have a reference angle of 30, I'd be taking 360 degrees minus the reference angle. So again, that's going to come into play. We're eventually going to use all 4 quadrants, and I'll show you. This is where we're transitioning to over here. Notice the difference between this one over here and this one. This is going to stand out to us. So this means that we're using all 4 quadrants up here. So that's kind of a big deal. So actually, clear back in, I believe it was unit 1, we did problems like this. So this is nothing new. It's just been a long time since we've had this. So you have, so of the 4 quadrants, I'm noticing that this is positive. So sine is positive here and here and negative here and here. So I know that I'm going to focus on these top 2 quadrants and not down there. Okay, I also know if I'm using my unit circle that my reference angle is 60 degrees. So that's going to kind of give me a heads up. So I'm just going to follow what we talked about up here again. And so in quadrant 1, my reference angle is 60 degrees. So my actual angle is 60 degrees. And then in quadrant 2, I'm going to take 180 minus 60 is 120. Again, this should be a review. We're heading more in this direction, but we need to kind of go back and talk about these as well. So again, we have sine, just like in the first one. And so again, I'm talking about just quadrants 1 and 4. But the difference is, notice this one, it's the same thing, but this one is positive while this one is negative. Okay, so I'm no longer talking about this quadrant. Now I'm talking about quadrant 4. So when I'm dealing with this, remember you had like the positive 60 degrees in quadrant 1 and the negative 60 degrees in quadrant 4. So this would be my answer. We're looking at it as a like negative angle. That's the correct way to do it over there. When I transition over here and I'm looking at all 3 quadrants, so the last, when it was positive, I looked up here, but now I'm going to focus on these 2 down here. So again, I know my reference angle is 60 degrees. So 180 plus 60, that's going to give me 240. And 360 minus 60 is going to give me 300. Okay, so let's keep moving. We're just going to do one more like this. So tangent of -1. So let's look back. Tangent is the same quadrants, 1 and 4. So I notice that this is negative, so I'm just dealing with that quadrant 4. Okay, so think about where tangent is -1 in quadrant 4, and again, we're using those negative angles, so it's going to be -45. That's what that would look like. Over here, when I'm dealing with all 4 reference angles, tangent's positive here and here, and negative here and here. So I'm looking at that 45-degree reference angle in this quadrant and this quadrant. So I'm dealing with 135 and 315. Okay, so all of that is review. These are going to look different because they're just like the yucky decimals. So if you don't have your calculator, go ahead and get it, and we're going to really need it for this. So don't forget, the first thing I want to point out is that it should be in degree mode. So make sure you have it there. The second thing I want to point out is like it doesn't change. Like I'm going to still be going through this process. So cosine is positive here and here and negative here and here. So because it's positive, I'm going to be working through quadrants 1 and 4. Okay, so in quadrant 1, whatever I find my reference angle to be, that's going to be my actual angle. And then in quadrant 4, even though it's going to look very different, we're still going back up here to that process. Okay, so we're going to kind of get into the algebra part. So if I want to get rid of this cosine, I'm going to use some different color. I'm going to multiply by the cosine inverse. So remember what algebra tells you, whatever you do on one side, you're going to do on another side. So what happens is that these cancel out, and I get theta equals cosine inverse of 0.24. Calculator. So when I type that in, let's go ahead and do that. So again, make sure it's in degree mode. So cosine inverse, that's going to be like that second cosine for most of your calculators. Cosine inverse is going to be 76.11 degrees. This is your reference angle. So I know that in quadrant 1, I'm going to come over here because it's getting messy. Quadrant 1, my angle is going to be 76.11 degrees. In quadrant 4, I'm going to take that 360 and subtract my angle, and so I end up getting 283.89 degrees. So that's that process there. Let's go ahead and do another one. So secant. So what I want you to do is get it to this point here, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get to here. That's pretty, like, that's just doing the same thing that we did up there. But what I want you to feel comfortable seeing is that this is the same thing as cosine inverse equals -1/7. Okay, I'm going to tell you a trick that I do. I never include the negatives because that's going to throw you into different quadrants. So personally, this isn't like a math thing, but personally what I do is I'll just take the cosine inverse of 1/7 because that will give you that reference angle. So I'll come over here and start working. So the cosine inverse of 1/7, let's go ahead and do that, is 81.79. Okay, and then I'll do whatever I need to do from there. So let's kind of go backwards. Um, so I need to figure out where cosine is negative. So I have positive, negative, positive, negative. So it's negative in quadrants 2 and in quadrants 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this and figure out my two angles in both of those. So if I took 180 minus this 81.79, I'm going to get 98.21, and that's going to be the quadrant 1. And then 180 plus this is going to be 261.79. And so those are my two answers there. Okay, so this one, go ahead and set it up. So I'm going to push pause. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did up here, this process. So I'm going to flip it. So I want, because our minds don't work in this realm, it works in like sine, cosine, tangent. So I'm going to have the sine inverse of 4. That's what I'm trying to find. But here's the thing. Don't forget, sine just goes from -1 to +1. Remember we talked about that. So like think about sine as like opposite over hypotenuse. So you're saying that your opposite side is bigger than your hypotenuse. So sine will never be bigger than 1. So this is no solution. And we can stop there.